Welcome everybody to another essential conversation here at WellBeings. It's really good to be with you. And today I'm joined with Chione Hardy. This young lady is I suppose she's a self-help coach, self-esteem coach, sorry. She's a content creator. And we're going to talk about a lot of things today, but one of the main things we're going to talk about is this idea of, what social media calls or promotes or displays as successful relationships, and how influential that is to people's real sort of orientations in the world. So we're going to open this big subject up that we may return on future episodes because it's a big one. So welcome. Thank you for being here today, Chione. I'm going to call you Chi for the interview, if that's okay.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Nigel. I'm so happy to be having this conversation with you. I feel like this topic is really fitting because of the place which I'm coming from and the experience that you have as well. I feel like there's going to be a good synthesis between us. I feel like this is such a relevant topic as well because young people spend so much time on social media. And I know that we all, well, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us have experienced fear of missing out, FOMO, like jealousy. They go on Instagram, they go on YouTube, they watch couples vlogs, they look at couples who have this perfect lifestyle, perfect pictures, white teeth, perfect hair, perfect clothes, traveling the world, everything looks beautiful. And it's also very curated because social media is a marketing platform. People, they're selling themselves, they're selling brands. And I thought this would be a really interesting topic to speak about with you because you do a lot of group workshops, group therapy workshops, and you're actually in the trenches with a lot of these successful people. So I wanted to find out from you the reality, what goes on behind the scenes within these relationships as high achieving individuals. I know that you said that there's a specific term, type A personality. So let's talk more about that today.
Yeah, wow. And something you helped me look into, and then I looked into and I saw how big it was. It was this idea of a high value man.
Yeah.
6 foot tall, 6 figures, 6-pack.
Yeah.
As what a woman should set her sights on, and where this is going to, deliver her happiness and the fairy tale, and, just feeling into that for a minute. It's much more involved. Let's go back to childhood. Let's think about when we're growing up and what we interpret from our environment, right? What we interpret from our culture, what we interpret from mom and dad, what we interpret from really just people who are influential in our lives. And sometimes we might have given these sort of drivers of be successful, be strong, be helpful, be kind, be selfless. I come from Ireland, so the Irish mothers they promote selflessness. It's all about given to the world, and forgetting about themselves a little bit. So that's a driver. And then what's underneath the drivers keep us away from these other things that we learn, and they're called kind of injunctions. I'm using terminology now from transactional analysis. So basically an injunction would be things like don't feel, don't trust, or sort of parts of script where, there's a sort of I am less than, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I don't belong, I don't exist. So these sort of things, we all, no matter where we come from in our families, we take in these sorts of unconscious realities that are taught to us by our parents or our environment that are often not explicit, but implicitly we learn from what's not been said, by how innuendos, by gestures, by looks, by nonverbals. So we take in these sort of injunctions that say, for example, of not being enough. And then we have these drivers that keep us away from the pain of that. Like if I have an injunction that say, don't exist, then at the same time, I might have a a sort of driver to be strong and successful. So then as long as you're strong and successful, you'll not feel the pain of existing or feeling your emotions. From psychoanalytical terms, this would be called as compensating. You would compensate, or posturing, which would be needing to be larger than life, being, like posturing, like striving for the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 figure bank account. Compensating, if I'm ripped and muscular, then I'm going to be loved, or so all these sorts of, and then the deficits would be the feeling less, so these ideas of having 6 figures, 6 foot tall, and having a 6-pack often can be just compensations that the individual thought that's what would bring happiness, or what could bring security. And these are just false thinkings that they learned in their childhood, that when they get older, and then when, at certain stages, it doesn't bring the happiness. Like in our groups, we have men from Silicon Valley that are very, very wealthy. We have fitness models who I suppose would be in the magazines exactly what a woman is supposed to look like. But the reality of that brings happiness is really, really not true. There's often a lot of other sort of, the image masks the deeper pain.
That's really interesting, because why is it that achieving all of these things or becoming all of these things doesn't lead to happiness, when all of their life they've been told to be this way, and society has told them to be this way, their family, their environment has taught them to be this way? Why is it that when they finally actually get to this place, some people feel that sense of hollowness and they don't actually feel satiated then?
Well, first of all, a lot of our parents want to, implicitly or explicitly want us to be what they never could be, first of all.
Okay.
So there's a sort of gesturing, like, it's very extreme case that would be like the beauty pageants in America, like that's an extreme situation where the mother or the father, would really wanted to get that adorned, sort of beautiful celebration and validation, and they never got it. So they somehow push and caress their child into that landscape, unconsciously or sometimes very, very consciously. So they're starting off. So there's a sort of unconscious belief that this is what happiness is going to bring, because we don't have it. How often when we don't have something, we think, oh, the grass is going to be greener on the other side somehow. So fundamentally, that's there at the beginning. And the reality is that, we're so often, I don't know, there's so many ways to answer this question. I don't know if I'll be able to do it full justice because it's such a broad question. Often we're so distracted, fundamentally from a human perspective, we're always sort of wanting more. We're always wanting to, like in the group this week, we had a guy who had the 2 cars. One of them was a sports car. He has the bank account. He has the 3 houses. These were all goals that were supposed to bring happiness. He's on his 2nd marriage, and he entered into the group because it was also faltering. It was possibly heading towards divorce, because again, there was a lot of struggles in the relationship. There was a lot of struggles within him. So if we keep, often in the self-help world, or sometimes in the coaching world, it's all about change yourself, be more optimum, be more on top of your game, be more, change this, do this. So I think that's really helpful at some stages of our development. But the work that I see that can bring and birth more happiness is not about changing yourself. It's about getting to know yourself, getting to know, getting to love the parts we learn to not love or not like. Learning to look into that part from our past that we decided a long time ago as children, consciously or unconsciously, not to look at. So so happiness, I think, is not a really good agenda to live a happy life, although it's promoted a lot. That's also promoted under a subcontext of success. I think living an authentic life, a vulnerable life, helps you navigate the ups and downs, the the uncertainties, the loves and the losses of an ordinary life worth living that's successful in a better way than just wanting it to be happy, because we're so constantly disappointed because we can't maintain that happiness.
So having a growth mindset. So essentially, you have just said that we form these beliefs to give us a sense of security. I find that quite interesting, though, because I've had a few conversations. There's two men who I've spoken to in the past year, and I've had the same conversation with them because I wanted to find out their perspective. And they both said that as their role as a man, I shouldn't say it like that, it sounds like I'm taking the myth out of them, but they said as a man they feel like it's their responsibility not to be happy but to achieve and to do, and that's just a classic gender role. But the striking thing that I found about that was that they said that their happiness is not their priority, and it's for their wife to be happy, it's for their wife to enjoy, but it's not for them. They need to be stoic. And I found it quite it was interesting, but also just it kind of threw me off, because I was just thinking, I know that a lot of men want to achieve, and that's where they find their masculinity, but I feel like a lot of men, they kind of they numb their emotions so that they can do and be, because if they're just emotionally fluctuating all of the time, then it's quite difficult to just get on with things. And I see you as being that person who integrates it all and teaches you that you can still be in touch with your emotions and succeed and achieve. But why is it that so many men feel like you can't feel, or you shouldn't feel, or that if you begin to feel, you can't achieve anymore? And so I'm saying that's a question. Actually, no, I'll let you finish that first and then I'll do the follow-up.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and again, I don't know enough about the two men who told you that, because it would be very individual to what they were experienced through in their childhood, as well as their maybe possible cultural influences at the time of their childhood. But what I often find, and what you're describing, was I ever one? Maybe I was a little bit at one stage, but not as much as a lot of the clients I meet that are very robotic. And robotic means they get the job done at their own personal expense. They don't really matter, in a way, like sort of like another flavor of selflessness, where I don't exist, my emotions don't exist, I exist in the service of making other people happy. Well, if you spend a life trying to make other people happy, then you're going to feel resentful. You're going to feel really troubled by trying to stop other people being troubled. That's a standard. So what we're dealing with here is sort of A-type male behavior, and I'm generalizing a little bit. What does that mean? That means, like, do you know anybody who's always time urgent, who's always never
hurry
enough,
up driver?
there's never enough time in the day. And then this other term, which is called free-floating hostility, which is agitation, irritation, anger, and impatience. And do you know anybody that has those qualities who are successful? These are, and not to mention the physical impact that has on your body, because what I'm describing here is, and this is research that's been done in the States since the mid-60s, really brings together like the highest cases that you can eat vegan, you can eat meat, you can exercise, not exercise, you can smoke, you can not smoke, doesn't matter. But the common denominator of cardiovascular disease is this type A male behavior, who's constantly, the nervous system's jacked. They're sort of always in that sort of state of mild or moderate anxiety, and it's taxing on the physicality. But also it stops, wards off intimacy. And that's not their priority. And I think fundamentally we come into the world where there is this sort of initial intimacy with mother, and then something happens along the way where that feels too threatening, where being humorous feels too threatening because it beckons intimacy. having sort of playfulness. Oh, that's too vulnerable. Or I can't go in, I'm not into touching. That can move towards some sort of intimacy. So the stoicness that you're talking about often is like some sort of very understandable early life decision, because they had to be distant because it wasn't safe. And as they get older, that works so well back then, because that's what they did to survive. It's like, good on them, great job. But now, as adults, it doesn't really serve us, or it doesn't really, or we miss out on that possibility of nourishment, on that sort of wonderful thing called closeness and togetherness. They have separateness, and they don't have the closeness. And I think we're talking about high value men, and I'm just going to put in women as well. I think we can cultivate closeness and togetherness and individualization. Then we got something that's high value.
I find myself looking at different people, you maybe like celebrity relationships, and being like, I wonder if they're actually happy. But then I guess everyone is kind of operating at their own sense of awareness. But do you think that it's for an outsider to even, like, if I had a friend who was this way, do you think that it's my responsibility to try and help them to learn or to show them? Or do you think that everyone is just going through their own journey and coming to their own realizations? And is it even, our responsibility to psychoanalyze and reveal, or do you think that everyone is just overcoming themselves or exploring?
Well, I think fundamentally, well, I'll just talk about what I do as much as I can do it, is this place where my wife, my daughter, the important men in my life and the important women in my life, that friends, that I don't psychoanalyze any of them. I don't invade their space like that. I don't rescue. That's another thing, that people do. It's another thing that I used to do a lot of. I used to define, that was a sort of being helpful. I learned that from my childhood, and I learned to take it to the highest degree, which is then to become a therapist, and then to get filled by the pursuit of rescuing and the validation of them receiving my rescuing, and changing somehow, and some sort of fantasy like this is going to make me feel better deeply, which it never ever did. So to answer your question, I think to be able to accept somebody where they are, if they come to and ask you for help, and if you feel like you would like to, or that you feel that you have the knowledge to help them, or you could, I think the best helping a lot of people could experience is just to be with people. If they're feeling sad, well, move towards a friend who doesn't need to change your state, that you feel sad with them together. Feel your pain, but you don't have to be alone with your pain. And often this is such a fundamental thing called accompaniment that we all really should be doing more of, or that we could develop more in our homes, in our friendships, in our groups, that we can have that sort of safety where all of you is welcome just as you are. And I'm not here to take this grandiose position and to be in defense, which is what rescuing is. There's no real connection happening. There's a sort of disempowerment that's happening. So no, there's like this invitation to just accept you as you are. And I'm going to be able to have regard for you, whether you see the world different than me, whether we're completely polar opposite. But how can I find this place where you have the right to be where you are, and I have the right to be where I am, and can I just meet you there? Now that's high value relating. Just that, and what a journey it would be to learn to cultivate regard for the other in that way. And what I have found that helps us do that is we can learn to do it for ourselves first. We're talking about relationships, but the first one we got to look at is, how are we with ourselves? How harsh are we? How critical are we when we look at these reels of the perfect man, the perfect woman, the perfect body. What are we saying to ourselves when we're observing that? How much of it does it consume us? Well, the statistics are we're watching social media more now than we ever did as a nation, as a worldwide nation ever. So it can't help but impact us, and it's how we are with ourselves in these moments. I think is really important, where we can learn to be more compassionate, where we can call our critical thinking into question. I think that's so important. So like this is again such a big. It's all these questions have these layers to them, and
they do, yeah, they do, yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because it just made me think about you know, the times where I have felt some kind of, I don't know, loneliness or dissatisfaction or something, and I've been on my phone looking on Instagram, and I've looked at someone else's profile and just felt inadequate for whatever reason. And one way of thinking which I've developed is, whenever that has happened, I don't really spend as much time on social media now anyway, but I used to just think to myself, what is it that I think that they have that I don't have? And also, if I was to be this person or have whatever they have or look this way or whatever the thought is which is going through my mind, if I had that, what do I think that's going to satiate in my mind? Like, how is that going to fulfill me? I think it's, you know, we have all of these cognitive biases thinking like, if I was like this or if I was like that. But if we were like that, it just means that we would be like that. It doesn't mean that our thinking would still be the same. Our sense of security within ourselves would still be the same. We might just be more socially accepted by society.
A lot of the time, it's so thinking is the problem. I remember my first therapist, and I talked for a while, and then he said, well, Nigel, you know, what we're dealing with here is just simply how you're thinking is a little bit skewed, you know. So you're also talking about comparisons, you know. I remember, you know, years ago reading a quote where comparison or comparing really is the killer of joy, and or it amputates joy from the person's life, because you don't know the story, you don't know the backdrop. You're getting, like, it's almost like what you're talking about is like you're peeking over the fence of someone's house, and you can't see into all the rooms, and you can't even see the whole garden, and you're just seeing something. And then that part of you that feels insecure or inadequate or not enough somehow starts to project that fantasy of what they have, what you don't have, that confirms your own not enoughness. You know, it's like sabotaging in a way. And, you know, one of the main things I deal with a lot in the clinic is body image issues that show up for women. And what is seemingly one of the things that they do automatically, and they start to cut social media out. They start to cut out the Instagram. They start to cut out because that's some of the points at the beginning of therapy. They get triggered a lot with that. And that really seems to help them, because that's the people who come into therapy, because there's so many people when they see that, like the same as last year, I had a bodybuilder coach on the podcast, and he talked about, in the old days, you used to just be in competition with the guys in the gym. Now you're in competition with all the guys in the world.
The world, yeah.
Like, it's not crazy. And like, so it doesn't matter. There's always this, it's never good enough. It's never good enough. And then the guys, they all got to get enhanced. So then they take lots of things to get big just to impress the guys in the gym. And it's like, when you know, it's really, of course, it's fine up to a point, and then it's really a lot to do with the insecurity and the lengths we go to fulfill a fantasy that does not give us that happiness that we think we're going to get.
That's so true. I feel like, reflecting on that time period of my life as well, I can see that I didn't actually have my own identity. I was trying to find myself in all of these different places. I was trying to look at other people's lives to try and find myself within them, instead of just coming back to me and seeing what really felt right, regardless of what it looks like, but really what feels right. And since I've been developing myself more in that way, there is no comparison. You cannot compare apples and oranges. Yes, they are fruit, but they're different, and they're both beautiful in their own right. But yeah, it's just it's a journey that we all go through. But social media.
Well, again, it's like it's really nice that you know classified it as like apples and oranges there, because, and this is probably going to sound like so like a normal understanding, but it's actually often not, and it's taken me an awfully long time to learn it, and I still have to keep reminding myself this, and it's that people are different than me. And sometimes we either want to be like them or we want them to be like us, and the reality is they're different than us, and can we allow them to be different than us, and where we don't have to be like them, and where they don't have to be like us. And in relationships, a lot of the time sometimes we want to change our partners to think and see and feel and behave the way we do. You know, like in one of our groups there, the woman, she dropped her sport, did the sport that the husband liked, dropped the food she liked to eat to the food that the husband liked, dropped her hobby. She did some adventurous sport that the husband used to like to do, jumping out of things, and then just shaped. She didn't have a life. Her life was merged in, which is something else. It's creating a symbiotic relationship, but that happens that way. And then on the other way, we look at people and we want to be like them. And it's like learning, can we be different, and look at these parts that are critical, look at the part that doesn't feel enough, allow space to feel into that sort of what I will call like a critical voice, or a critical parental voice that's telling you you should be like this, you ought to be like that, or you need to be like this. The sort of absolutes that haunts everybody on some level. And I think the first thing is to just notice that that's happening. I think another step along that journey would be, okay, well, how does that affect me? How does that impact me? How do I feel when I'm being that to myself because I don't have 6 foot long legs and an hourglass figure? So how does that feel? Yeah, it feels really sad. I feel like kind of beaten up by it. Okay, so I can feel the emotion that this sort of thinking creates, and I allow space for it, and I allow other people into my guilt or shame around it, and then I start to think about my thinking, and I start to call my thinking into question. And sometimes you may have to go to a therapist to help you with that. I really recommend that actually as an option, or you join a group, because sometimes we have these beliefs that we believe to be absolutely true, or we believe these voices to be absolutely true. And just because we speak our thoughts doesn't mean that we actually have learned to think about our thinking. It's completely different. That's a skill that we have to, I think it's one of the fundamental things. One of my early teachers, still a teacher, Bill Cornell, he would always say one of the most fundamental things we have to do in our lifetime is continually call ourselves into question. And that's powerful. And to be with people where we're curious. I hear you saying that, Chione, that you're growing over the years, and I'm sure as you've been growing, you're also hanging out with other people who are kind of curious about some of the same things that you're curious, and you can have sort of deeper curiosities in your conversations around, challenging those old thoughts or those old beliefs, or extinguishing these sort of ideals that we used to live by to maybe a different orientation.
That's so true. I think that, when you're someone who spends a lot of time on the internet, I'm just talking about the topic in general, anyone who is aware of the concept of the high value man, it's probably because they've spent a lot of time on the internet watching some of these YouTube videos. And with me, with some of the events and experiences that I've gone through, which have surfaced feelings of comparison and that kind of stuff, it's a lot of the time it's the environment that we're in. And like you just said about having these beliefs that aren't actually true, they might be true in the external world because of the environment that you're in. So it doesn't mean that they're actually true, but it just means that the common consensus within your community, if you're in the middle of LA, people are gonna, they're gonna value attractiveness because that's just what the culture is like there. They're more swayed towards aesthetic beauty in that sense. Whereas if you take yourself out and put yourself in a different part of the world, then that's not going to be the thing which you're valued for the most. And I think when you're struggling with something as well, I found sometimes just assess your environment and figure out if it's actually conducive to your healing. Are you surrounding yourself with people who are actually nurturing to you, or are you always having to go against the grain and prove yourself to the people around you because they're also on this treadmill, this hedonistic treadmill within themselves as well?
We're surrounded, again, I think, yeah, it's also, it's cultural, societal, and also it's what we've learned from our family homes as well. So it's all those different influences that kind of pollute the possibility of a fresher consciousness. And I remember, as you were talking, I remember the words of Gabriel Maté, and he was talking about schizophrenia, and schizophrenics in North America, one of the worst places in the world to be a schizophrenic, because you're not of any use to society. So you're, putting off in an institute, and you're putting out of, like, you're kind of not really a high value member of the community. But if you're born in somewhere like a tribe in Africa, maybe in Gambia, then you would be seen as somebody very important within that tribe, because you would have something to give. You would see what others couldn't see, and there would be value in your uniqueness, and you would be part of, and you wouldn't be pushed out. And I'm using this example for multiple reasons. I think, to answer your question, yes, where you are in the world is important, but where you are in your own inner world is very important as well. And those ghosts and hauntings from our childhood, and from different societal expectations of who you should be, what you should do, really do create a sort of rigidity and a sort of narrowing in how you see the world, and how you see what you need to be a successful person in the world. And I think one of the most fundamental things that I've learned as a very, on my young journey here on planet Earth, and that is that we need people to grow. We need people to really learn and challenge these sort of scripts that we would run, these sort of ideals that we live by. And I think only when we come into sort of groups of people where we can allow that level of curiosity and sort of intimacy and truth and sort of safety to be all kind of omnipresent over time, it really helps to distill a new way of being able to be like that, to be unique, to have our own individualization, but to have closeness with ourselves, love for ourselves and for others, just like that, the schizophrenic in that tribe in Africa, how we can be that for ourselves and how we can be that within our communities. And I think that's the thing I'm probably most passionate about, because that's where I see that people can really grow when we come together. And I think at this time in our lives, in the evolution of the world, it's not about following gurus. It's not about, trying to go to a cave in the mountaintops. It's about being in the world, and being in the world in smaller communities and groups where they're responsive, where they're reliable, where they're safe, where then we can learn to grow and really discover that we belong, not for what we do, but because who we are. That's high value. That's high value right there.
I think that's so important. It's not about necessarily going on this huge spiritual voyage and isolating yourself, but actually integrating yourself in your own community, going on this internal journey in your own space. So how do you actually get to that place? Like, let's go back to the concept of this high value man. He's got a type A personality, so you can describe it better than I can, but slightly more neurotic in his personality, very goal oriented, but maybe has a family, children, how do you actually balance all of that and do the emotional work at the same time? How do you manage all of that pressure, really? Do you feel like, also adding on to that, a lot of the men who come into your groups, they've been burnt out, or they've gone through some experience which has jolted them to actually go down this journey? Do you think that there's a place that men, I'm just talking about men now, but men have to get to in order to kind of crack them open? Or do you think that there are some people who, you know, like, what has been your experience? What have you seen?
Well, first of all, I just want to name, like, in the ordinary world, normal people are sometimes more messed up than the neurotic people, just so that, because they're so heavily adapted, they're so heavily indoctrinated, you know. So so it's like, it's not that, it's like
You mean
everyone,
there's layers?
yeah, it's like there's layers there, and I think not everybody's going to want to be, you know, kind of, some people don't want to change, you know, first of all, you know, and I kind of understand that, you know. It's like, it takes courage to change. Yeah, it takes a lot of something, either a lot of something going wrong for them to really look at their life to say, okay, well, I got to try something different, and I've done all this and it hasn't changed. So I need to move, and most of the times I've had to do it all by myself, or I've been in my own mind about it. So bring myself to another mind, like a therapist or someone who's of where you feel safe to share, even like a good friend who doesn't need to constantly say, oh, like giving you unsolicited advice, or you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to change this, you need to, no, just where they can be with you, I think is really, really helpful. But, you know, there's this place where, you know, for the people who do want to change, there is this opportunity that you can't really fathom at the beginning, you know, that you can't really see it. But what we see coming into the groups is people are burnt out. They have multiple anxiety disorders on some level. They have relational conflicts with themselves and others. And there's a sort of, and use that thing, irritation, agitation, anger, and impatience. So they're not always the nicest people to be around, you know, and often they're very grandiose. So they have this sort of, I'm better than you, which really is a defense that keeps them from having that intimacy. So I meet men at different stages of their life who, I suppose the umbrella term could be that I feel that they're starved, you know. There's a starvation happening. There's a poverty-ness in them. They may have a massive bank account, but they're in such an emotional deficit. And for me, wow, like, to step into a group from that state takes so much courage. And maybe a lot of men, maybe more men than there are men coming into these groups, it just feels like too much for them. And that's honorable. Like, that's where they are. Doesn't mean that they're better than or less than. It's just where they are. So for the men who are able and do want change and want that fulfillment, I suppose that's the word I would use instead of success. Success is, it's funny. It's a funny word. Fulfillment is something else. To live, to move towards a fulfilled life versus being pulled back to the dull safety of the same old defensive ways of living, of needing to be more ways of living. So it's like and even when we're on a journey, I find that what I see from the men and from my own life, there's always this seduction to be pulled back into the old familiar ways, the old familiar ways of medicating, the ways of being not present, the ways of being disconnected, the ways of running away from the actual medicine of intimacy. So and have compassion for that, because it's not a straight line sometimes. So I meet men at different levels on that sort of trajectory of starvation, and they come in and when they're with other people, and they can and they're welcome just as they are. They don't have to be awakened, but there's a closeness that happens where someone could call somebody out and say, hey, like, I'm noticing you're not saying anything today. Like, what's going on? Or somebody might be, trying to fix everybody and rescue everybody, and someone could say, hey, you don't have to be more for you to be here. Like you matter just the way you are. Like, you don't need to do that with us. And that's kind of confronting when somebody's done that their whole life. So,
Mm-hmm.
so it's this wonderful, we're all imperfect. We all struggle. I struggle, and I'm imperfect, and I'm happy that I'm on a journey where I'm learning to understand the reasons why I do the things that compromise my spaciousness, or that cut back on my levels of intimacy with the people I love, including myself. And
Mm-hmm.
it's constant supportive environments that I find that are just, like I discovered them in my like kind of mid 30s, and I'm just like, what warms my heart is like groups with kids where I would have loved as a teenager to be in a responsive, reliable, vulnerable group as a teenager. God, that would have changed my life. That would
Yeah.
have changed my
Mm-hmm.
life. So yeah, that's the sort of people that we come in, and we have mixed groups, we have men and women groups, and I have to say each of them have their own flavor. A lot of them are long term. The people they get benefit and they stay. It runs from generally with a lifespan in and around 2 to 3 years, and in a group, when they learn to do that intimacy in the group, they bridge it into the world with the people they matter. And when they start to bridge that, they no longer need the group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the beautiful thing. It's like, wow, and then we celebrate them as they go back into the world again.
Mm-hmm.
Powerful.
So I guess you can tell me if this is true or false, but I would assume that the grandiosity that some of the men may enter with a group with, the superiority that they're trying to place themselves higher than anyone else, whether it's because of their status or the amount of money that they have, do they feel like letting go of that superiority, grandiosity is going to stop them from like working or achieving? Do you think that that's why people develop that false sense of confidence, so that they can actually, have the ability to push forward and achieve? And like, how does someone develop real confidence then?
Well, thank you for bringing this, because I never answered your last question. I think one of your last questions was about how to do this sort of, it's hard, like, to be able to grow in this sort of vulnerable way, to learn to open to intimacy, to learn to open to yourself, how to do that and still work. Well, it can feel very strange at the beginning. It's like, I suppose when you learn to paint, it feels, whoa, like I'm no good at this. I need to practice a lot and a lot to be able to do it. But what happens is, it's a minimum of an hour and a half every week where you could take out of your life. And in that sort of frame, you could have, and then you have a week to integrate what happened there. Wow, I'm seeing men being vulnerable. I'm seeing men with their guards down. Geez, I'm noticing I'm actually seeing a part of me in them. Wow, like I'm able to slow it, because everything starts to slow down. Like you start to notice things. You could be in defense for a long time, and then somebody says something that you resonate with, that's something you haven't spoken from, or a place in you haven't spoken from. And there's this wonderful sort of softening that happens over time. So it's a very doable thing to either enter into one-to-one therapy, or to enter into a group dynamic. In between that time, I think if you're really interested and not just fascinated with change, but actually want to do the work, then you could maybe have a little journal, and you could check in with yourself, and write down how you're feeling, noticing if you got triggered by your kids, or by your partner, or by your boss, and just writing down a few of the things. So you'd start to get to know yourself a little bit. Maybe you may want to meditate, which is also very, very good for business. And by the way, if you started to develop in these sort of groups or in one-to-one therapy, your ability to relate is improved. So, so if we actually took let's say, imagine we're talking about that grandiose gentleman, and we spoke to his secretary, which we did one time, by the way, and we got the secretary to say that how she felt about him before and how she felt about him afterwards. The level of relatability, the level of connectivity, it changes. It's like we can learn to be more kind and clear, in how we communicate. So, and it's not necessarily about getting the grandiose person to change immediately. It's about helping understand why that position or that posture had to be developed in the first place. Having compassion for it, having like a sort of real growth psychologically, more so than changing the grandiosity at the beginning. And through that growth of awareness and that growth of, maybe consciousness or presence, then we can get into the sort of emotionality, why that defense is there in the first place. And we could be curious about it, not ridicule it, not shame it. I think the guy who's grandiose does that a lot to himself, or at least projects and does it to other people. So we come at it from a different angle. It's almost over time can be disarming, and over time that question of why am I being grandiose and being curious about that, and slowly you got to live that question for a while, and then when you least expect it, you'll be living the answer. It'll happen over time. Change is not of symptoms, is not the first course of action. Helping the person get to know themselves. That's why, therapy, in a way, it doesn't matter what type of therapy it is. You buy a fridge will do certain things, right? It's going to keep some food fresh. It's going to keep things cold. You're going to be able to freeze some things, kind of predictable. When you enter into the therapeutic landscape of getting to know yourself, you don't know what it is you're going to discover. It's such, and for the people who are curious and brave and wanted to step into the unknown, which is a lot different than not knowing, but into the unknown of themselves, then it'll be a wonderful adventure of ups and downs, and that then you'll be able to then navigate life with all its ups and downs in a whole new way. I'm not saying you're going to be like the captain of the ship who's peaceful and equanimous as the ship is sinking, but there's a way in which you could have a peace where it was never there before.
But what about for the people who they feel like opening Pandora's box is just gonna, open a can of worms, and they feel like they won't be able to take what they reveal about themselves, that it's too much for them, and that's why they don't want to go through that journey of self-exploration, like the fear that brings? How do you overcome that so that you actually get to the place where you want to be open and receptive?
Well, I think a lot of people have that belief. I think as a young child, survival strategy is, well, okay, well, I talked earlier about not existing or not feeling, learning that from the family, learning to have that adaptation, so then that you can survive the environment, do what the big people tell you what to do, so you feel that you can thrive somehow in that environment. So you box away all these parts, these disowned parts of yourself. So the child part of us will have that belief. I think it's a very fundamental part, but it's a child having that belief. So as you grow psychologically and we start to get into more of an adult position, and it's different for everybody, that length of time where we can be from that, then we can realize, wow, like, yeah, there's some things here, and they're emotions. And as long as I can get the proper support, then I can allow myself to feel them. For example, let's talk about emotions. There's many things that's locked away, but let's talk about emotions, where some people we know in our life, we might say, wow, like, that person's so emotional all the time. They're always collapsing. They're always, they're drowned in their emotions. And that's not exactly what we're talking about that's going to happen to you, but maybe there'll be times where you'll get in touch with deep-seated grief. I don't want to use this analogy, but I think it's lovely, but it's a bit crude. It's like, you don't want your children being their emotions, driving your car, and you don't want to put them in the boot. You don't want to lock away the emotions either. And it's about being able to have them, but not letting them rule the roost, where you have that support to be able to help you be able to notice there's this part of me that's in pain, as opposed to all of me is in pain. And that's a difference in where your awareness is, what ego state you're in, and then, moving more towards an adult orientation. So it's really, and it's different for everybody, but the main thing is The child feels it's going to be too much because the child had to do it by himself, had to make these decisions. The reality, as you enter into a responsive, reliable environment with a therapist or with a group of people and a therapist, the difference is that you're not alone with your pain. And that lived experience will challenge that belief.
So do you feel like a lot of people who they cheat, you know, they have infidelity in their relationships, they're using that as a form of escapism? And is that something which develops in childhood, or where do you think that comes from?
It's an impossible question to answer, but what I find myself a lot of the time is sometimes a lot of the people who cheat or have infidelities saw that happen in their childhood. Sometimes what they saw in their childhood was that dad was emotionally unavailable. And that's what the woman was attracted to initially. But as that woman grew in the relationship, she learned that, well, she's feeling starved here. He's 6 foot tall. He's like a Greek god. He has a Ferrari. We have the house, and we have the house in the Hamptons, but I am starved. And then she's not able to communicate because her mother wasn't a great communicator. So she learned to medicate. And the way that she learned to medicate was when she was in the shop, she got attention from somebody who was also shopping in the same aisle. And then they started to talk, and then one thing led to another, and then an affair happened. That's one option of what can happen. There's so many specificness to it. Sometimes people are just, it's like intimacy is something that takes time to cultivate. It takes work to be in a committed relationship. So after the initial phase, when eros wears off and the fantasy of what it is gone, and the real here and now relationship is here, the ordinary relationship, then both parties struggle with knowing what to do to put the work into to keep developing the relationship. And then at that stage, sometimes infidelities happen at that because they're so disheartened because it's not what it once was, or, you know, they're getting triggered by their partner and they don't know how to navigate what's going on. A funny story was, I remember it was a year ago, and in my clinic in Bali, I had a lovely, very humorous woman come into me, and she was in her 80s and she was on her 11th marriage. And she says, Nigel, I'm coming in here. I don't really know why I'm in here, but somebody said that it might be something to do with me, why I keep having all these divorces. And I don't believe that totally, but I'm here to be curious about it. And she was a lovely, lovely, lovely old lady. And yeah, she just kept marrying the same man. She says, I don't know, they all look different, but I end up with the same man. You know, it's like, and I, you know, so we do attract. I suppose this is a little bit deeper. I think in my limited experience, what I see is that we attract partners where the soul of the partner reflects back to you your greatest, the things you need to see the most. So your partner might reflect back to you sort of, you may get triggered and feel insecure. You might feel you have trust issues. You might have, I believe that the two souls come together to show each other where they need to grow. And I think at certain stage in a relationship, that dynamic happens where you see, but if you blame the other and you start pointing fingers and say, well, this relationship would be great only if you changed, but if you look deeply into yourself and observe what was going on, where were you responsible for overextending or compensating or pulling away or blending into the wallpaper or acting out in some way or not really being in the relationship. When you can take responsibility, then there's an opportunity for you and your partner to really grow, where infidelity doesn't happen, you know. But and sometimes relationships run their course as well. And sometimes people don't communicate honestly that it's over, and then they act out to end a relationship. So it's a very broad, individual sort of case by case. But yeah, I think if at a certain stage, if the two people in the relationship have a healthy environment of where they can be vulnerable outside of the relationship with friends or in a therapeutic group or with a therapist or with a really responsive community, then I think they're in a really good place where they can talk about with themselves what they've learned about themselves and the struggles that come up in the relationship, that they can communicate that. I think that's the true form of intimacy before it gets into the bedroom. I think it's kind of, that's what helps you talk about it, even if you are feeling that you feel like the relationship is no longer what you need in your life right now, and you can explore with the partner what it is. And if you agree to consciously decouple, like that's so possible. But whenever there's no feeling, no real communication, then infidelity is always around the corner. It's always a possibility. So.
But what about people who say that men can still be in love and still cheat? Do you think that that's possible?
Well, again, it's like it's a really unusual question, but I have heard it asked before, and it's unusual because it really depends on the individual's idea of what love is. We had a group, and one man's idea of love was to be needed. When he was needed, that's what he thought love was. That's what happened in his childhood. That's what he learned when mommy needed him to chop the potatoes, or when mommy needed him to help her in the garden, or when mommy needed him to set the table. Then that's what he knew love as. So when his wife was needing him to do stuff, then that's what he felt love as. But because he was being starved, and there was maybe a lot of other issues in the relationship, then that guy could possibly think, yeah, I can cheat and still feel love from my partner because my understanding of love is to be needed. So it could be so many different versions of that, Chi, that would impact somebody's style of thinking. It's really how he would think and interpret what love is, which is quite a big question for each of us to kind of comprehend. What does that mean to you?
That's interesting. So basically you're saying that it really just depends on each individual person's perspective of what love in reality is. So that's why there are so many people who, the man will cheat or the woman will cheat and they'll say, I still love you. And the other person can't accept that because they'll say that's not what love is. But it's just really a miscommunication. It's two people's worldviews coming together or slamming together. And
well, it's two people, but it depends who's actually, like, is it two kids in the relationship? Are we in more of a sort of child state in relation to our thinking? Are we in the sort of younger place of understanding, about intimacy? We may see the world through the eyes of a young child, and yeah, you can have all sorts of orientations then, or maybe you come in from a more parental part where it's like set like old fashioned and stoic and sort of, yeah, it's like it needs to look like this, and I had a guy in the group, and he was a lovely devoted Muslim man, really, really, yeah, well loved in his community for his service, and then through being so strict in his sort of scriptures, let's say, he had a very parental, strong, controlling understanding of what relationship meant, like, and what it meant to him, what love meant. It had to follow these rules and these rules and these rules almost conditionally, and that was the picture of, or the frame of reference that he used for what he brought into his relationships, and he learned that from his parents. So it depends on what part of the person has evolved. Are we in more the sort of child place? Maybe in other places that they're in this free child, where it's all about freedom and free love and polyamory, and wow, like I just want to be free, and it's like having the right balance of that, I think, is really, really important. And then sometimes it's not an adult orientation, so sometimes it could be avoiding something. And sometimes, I have met people who are polyamorous who are very, very conscious, and if everyone's aligned, it does work. But I don't see that too often, but it can also happen. So I don't want to be saying that that's not a conscious relationship either. So it really depends on where the individual is. Or it could be from an adopted child where it's all about they learned how to really change themselves like a chameleon so that they please the other, like that earlier man you talked about, where I am here only to please, and I don't actually exist, and my feelings don't exist. And after a while, he's going to feel really starved, and that's going to be problematic in the relationship later on.
So when you say a kind of childlike perspective of intimacy, could you just refine what exactly that means and what behavior that might look like in the external world and how you can kind of progress out of that?
Well, a very typical one that we came up against in the group the other week was just somebody who just didn't take any responsibility for his actions. No responsibility for his actions. He would shout at his children, shout at his wife, and he wouldn't have any remorse. He wouldn't have any self-reflection. He would just, like a child when they were in 4 or 5 years of age, the world evolved around them. And the other doesn't really exist, and sometimes unless you're an object, like to get the breast fed or to get food on the table, where it's that orientation. There's often no real, sometimes remorse or ability to think about what's just happened. Maybe, so there's no taking responsibility for the actions. That's definitely an orientation from a child, please. So how that's a wonderful dynamic to work on in group is because it will eventually play out in the group. And it's in a safe container where the person might even be able to hear some feedback about how he's perceived in the group, and how he may have a woman respond back to him saying, I feel really dismissed. I feel ridiculed. I feel you've just shut me down. And that makes me want to back away from you. And the man might have come into the group saying, hey, I'm noticing my wife's really distant. And then he'll start talking, and then somebody in the group came in and said, well, I'm noticing that you're making me want to back away from you because you're being very dismissive and aggressive. So he gets to hear this wonderful feedback that he would never be able to hear in his everyday life. And
I was just thinking about being like a corporate boardroom. You'd never get that kind of interaction.
Well, I think in the past, yes, but I think more now we have more and more corporate businesses learning that if we have more sort of healthier styles of relating, because the old school corporate is you got daddy sitting at the top who is almost like a persecutor, and then you've got everybody underneath, and you've got rescuers and you've got victims, and it's just a sort of hierarchical sort of thing where there's no real intimacy and no real communication taking place, and there's a lot of sort of ego leadership instead of heart-centered togetherness leadership, which is a completely different thing. So I am seeing, of course, bigger companies like Google, for example, they're very proactive in this area because they understand that it really improves productivity, and it really, more than productivity, you keep your staff. If staff feel that there's a high level of stroke economy where where you're being acknowledged, where you have a space to communicate, where you feel part of something, back to that wonderful term, a sense of belonging. Because if you have a sense of belonging, you're not going to be just trying to get your 2 years in and skipping to the next company and going up the corporate step ladder and on to the next. You're going to want to hang around because you're going to redefine what success is. Maybe it might actually be being part of something that you feel part of and a real important member because of who you are as much as what you do, or even more so, sorry. It's powerful. So that's how you would move out of a sort of childish disposition into a sort of over time an adult orientation due to feedback from the people in the group.
So basically what we've covered now is that we can look at other people's relationships, we can try and think that we know them, but ultimately we don't, because you can't actually compare different people. But out of your experience, and I'm sure everyone has their own experiences as well, we have seen it a lot of, there are cracks in the facade as well. So we shouldn't also just pretend that everything is perfect, and that we should all aim to have intimacy and integrity in our relationships and go down this journey of overcoming ourselves if we want to. It's also personal, isn't it? It's just personal. But I wanted to just wrap this up and ask you a final question. What do you think are some of the key takeaways that we can, or everyone who's watching can really integrate into their lives today, to communicate better with the people that they love, so that they can actually have these high quality, high value relationships?
Well, I just want to also just frame it here that being a high achiever, you can be a high achiever, and you can also learn to address certain traits that are problematic in your life. You can start to enhance the other aspects in your life that have been the consequence maybe at high achievement, where you can tend to the relational landscapes of the people who matter most by looking inward. And by doing that, you create a sort of intimacy with yourself that then starts to almost, in a wave-like effect, touch the people who matter most in your life, and it echoes into your businesses and into friendships. So that's possible. The main thing here is that we're all kind of perfectly imperfect, and for those who are listening to this right now and are feeling, wow, like this is it feels like such a big jump to be able to get to becoming more intimate with themselves, or to be more vulnerable, or to be anything other than the way you are. So first of all, I'd just like to say, if you're listening and you're feeling overwhelmed in that way, no, what I really mean is that you're perfect the way you are. There's a good reason why you are the way you are. And all of us are struggling with something. And if by listening to this, you're curious about wanting to take a step further into getting to know yourself, maybe it's getting to challenge the self-criticism that you might have, go towards a professional, go and reach out to see a therapist, go and join a group, contact us. We can give you information. We're connected to a lot of places in the UK and in Ireland and online. And we're running a retreat program in Portugal called the Reset Retreat, which is on the 9th of November. And that's for a very small group of 11 people. And we run this program twice a year, and it's quite, and on a later edition of this podcast, we'll talk in more in depth on that. So there'll be that option as well. But what I really want to say is that, yeah, we're all imperfect. And, but if you're curious to want to get to know yourself more, or you're feeling there's one part in how you are, or what keeps on happening in your relationships, maybe your romantic relationships, maybe in relationships of, authority, or maybe, with your children, that if you're interested in wanting to improve that particular dynamic that creates some sort of anxiety, stress, or suffering, then you can take that small step towards addressing that piece with a professional, or at the very least, maybe starting to talk to somebody who you admire, who you feel safe with, and share the dynamic, share the struggle, share the imperfectness of you, allowing yourself not to have all the bloody answers. We don't need to know everything. It's okay not to have the answer. And I really want to echo that, because sometimes we all secretly have a grandiose expectation that we're supposed to know. And I think my biggest learning in my life was when I was able to get into states and places where I didn't know the answer, where I allowed myself to be that vulnerable, that disarmed, that sort of in the unknown, as I talked about earlier. Then that's where I grew, because that's where there's potential, that's where there's life force, that's where there's excitement, and that's where I can really grow in intimacy with new parts that I didn't know existed in my being. So small steps, and you never know where you might end up.
I think that's so relevant, because literally this morning I wrote down in my notes, I have a really bad habit of imposing my opinion instead of asking questions when I'm not consciously thinking. So that's so important, just being open to not knowing, and instead of saying your opinion or asking leading questions, actually just being curious. And that is how you start an effective dialogue where you can develop true intimacy.
Yeah, you just keep, that's wonderful. I had to deal with that. Sometimes I think it still slips in with me, and it's a flavor of grandiosity. I think, it's a very powerful word, the grandiosity. It's kind of humbling to say that sometimes we are that. Well, you know what? Sometimes we're either. I'll speak about myself. Sometimes I'm grandiose. Sometimes I think I'm better than, and then sometimes I think I'm less than. And I think the adult position is to be in the middle. And that takes a bit of work to do that. But yeah, I love that vulnerable part there that you shared, where sometimes you impose a sort of knowing, or a sort of pushing that, that is almost in defense at that time, because something's really interesting happening in the background.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I'll just use a quick example. I could ask someone, were you scared? Instead of asking, how were you feeling? Because that's actually me embedding something into their mind. It's leading. And if it doesn't fit, then I'm never going to find out the actual truth about how they feel, what they think, and how they actually are.
Then you look at tonality, you look at your own body, you notice what actually happened. Were you scared when you asked them, were they scared? Because even like how would, so yeah, like I love what you're suggesting as another alternative, but what's a deeper, beautiful exploration is to look at what was going on for you when you said, are you scared? Because I remember a time when I might have said that, and I might have been scared myself, or their emotionality was something that was either bigger than mine, or more, or I got triggered or overwhelmed, and I immediately wanted to put out the flame of their being, or wanting them to be better, or I wanted to rescue them. So this is what we talk about, the sort of growth is getting to know ourselves, like it's not like, oh, I need to change this, and yes and no, yes and no, yes maybe, but first, what was going on? What's going on? And to be curious about ourselves, and to really call ourselves into question with compassion. How do you do that? Because often we question ourselves, but it's critical, How to be loving, kind, curious, with ourselves, and why we do the things we do. If we struggle with being able to do that, then go to a professional who can help you.
Well, I've loved this conversation. There's so many different avenues which we could go down, but we can save them for another episode.
We can indeed, and it's been a real pleasure, Chione. And there's and also, just so you know, viewers, this is a young woman who's she's in training to be a great psychotherapist at this time, and beyond, whatever road that'll take her on. And it's been really, I love your mind. I love how you bring in these really intriguing questions, and to be honest with you, I'm feeling nourished right now. So thank you for the 4-course meal, and yeah, let's do this again, Chione.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me, and I can't wait to create more with you in the future.
Thanks, Chione. And if anybody kind of got any benefits from this, if you enjoyed it, if you would like to share it with somebody, if you'd like to hit a like or a subscribe, or it really helps us reach more people, and we'd be really appreciated if you could do that. So thank you, and same time next week, everybody. Take care.